Older adults are the largest consumers of prescription drugs, yet they are often excluded from clinical trials. Adults over 65 represent about 17% of the population but consume over 40% of prescription medications. Despite this, many clinical trials exclude participants over a certain age or have eligibility criteria that inadvertently screen out older patients with common conditions like high blood pressure, diabetes, or mild kidney impairment. This creates a critical evidence gap. We are treating older patients with drugs that were never adequately tested in their age group. The patterns of exclusion are well documented. Patients over 75 are excluded from approximately 40% of cancer clinical trials. The most common exclusion criteria that disproportionately affect older adults include upper age limits, comorbidity exclusions that screen out patients with common age-related conditions, prohibitions on concomitant medications that many older adults take, and performance status requirements that may be harder for older patients to meet. The result is that the evidence base for many drugs is built on younger, healthier patients, and we simply assume the results apply to older populations. Aging fundamentally changes how the body processes drugs. Kidney function declines steadily. By age 80, GFR is typically 40 to 50% below young adult levels, so renally cleared drugs can accumulate to toxic levels at standard doses. Liver metabolism also changes. Phase 1 metabolism declines while Phase 2 is relatively preserved. Body composition shifts, decreased lean body mass and increased fat change drug distribution. And decreased albumin means more free active drug for protein-bound medications. Without dedicated PK studies in older populations, we are essentially guessing at the right dose. The average older adult takes 5 or more prescription medications. Polypharmacy creates enormous potential for drug-drug interactions that are almost never studied in clinical trials because most trials exclude patients taking other medications. This is the real-world gap. A drug that was tested in a monotherapy setting with carefully selected patients may behave very differently in an older patient who is also taking blood pressure medication, a statin, an antidepressant, and a diabetes drug. Drug-drug interaction studies specific to older populations with realistic medication profiles are urgently needed. Older adults face multiple barriers to clinical trial enrollment. Transportation is a major issue. Many older adults no longer drive or cannot easily travel to trial sites. Study visit schedules designed for working-age adults can be burdensome for older participants. Complex consent forms with small print are hard to read. And implicit bias among investigators, who may assume older patients are too frail or cognitively impaired to participate, further reduces enrollment. Yet studies show that when older adults are offered the opportunity to participate, they are often enthusiastic. The FDA and EMA have recognized the problem of underrepresentation of older adults. The FDA's guidance on geriatric information in drug labeling requires sponsors to discuss whether older patients were included in clinical trials and whether age-related differences in safety or efficacy were observed. The ICH-E7 guideline specifically addresses clinical trials in geriatric populations, recommending that older patients should be included in clinical trials in proportion to their expected use of the drug. However, these guidelines have not been sufficient to close the evidence gap. Several approaches can improve inclusion of older adults in research. Pragmatic trial designs with less restrictive eligibility criteria can include older patients with comorbidities. Decentralized and hybrid trials that reduce the need for travel can remove the transportation barrier. Home-based assessments and telemedicine visits reduce burden. Simplified consent forms with larger print and clear language improve accessibility. And enrichment strategies that specifically target older populations for pharmacokinetic substudies can build the evidence base without requiring large dedicated trials. Comprehensive geriatric assessment should be integrated into clinical trials involving older adults. This includes assessment of functional status, cognitive function, nutritional status, social support, and frailty. These assessments can help determine which older patients are most likely to benefit from treatment and which are at highest risk of toxicity. The concept of fit versus frail, rather than chronological age, should guide treatment decisions. Studies show that fit older patients often tolerate and benefit from treatments as well as younger patients, while frail patients need modified approaches. Geriatric oncology has led the way in studying cancer treatments in older populations. The ISAOG, International Society of Geriatric Oncology, has developed guidelines for treating older adults with cancer. Multiple studies have shown that selected older patients benefit from standard cancer therapies as much as younger patients. The concept of the geriatric assessment-driven treatment approach, where treatment decisions are based on physiological age rather than chronological age, has become standard in oncology and should be applied more broadly across other therapeutic areas. Including older adults with cognitive impairment in research raises special ethical considerations. Valid informed consent must be obtained from the participant if they have capacity, or from a legally authorized representative if they do not. The key is not to exclude patients with mild cognitive impairment, who make up a large proportion of the older population that uses prescription drugs, but to use appropriate consent procedures. Simple cognitive screening tools can determine capacity, and many patients with mild impairment can still meaningfully participate in consent decisions with appropriate support. The consequences of underrepresenting older adults in clinical trials are serious. Older patients may receive drugs at standard doses that are too high for their reduced kidney function, leading to toxicity. They may be denied treatments that could benefit them because of age-based exclusion criteria that have no scientific basis. And guideline committees making treatment recommendations have limited evidence to guide their recommendations for the age group that uses the most medications. The result is suboptimal treatment for the very population that needs medications the most. The future requires a systematic shift in how clinical trials approach older populations. Default inclusion rather than default exclusion. Eligibility criteria based on physiological parameters rather than chronological age. Routine PK substudies in older adults as part of drug development. Pragmatic trial designs that reflect real-world older populations. And most importantly, the recognition that age is not a disease. Being older does not automatically disqualify someone from participating in research that could benefit them and others. To build a better evidence base for older patients, sponsors should include older adults in Phase 2 and 3 trials in proportion to their expected use of the drug, conduct dedicated PK studies in patients over 75, use pragmatic eligibility criteria that reflect real-world populations, incorporate geriatric assessments to characterize frailty and functional status, and analyze safety and efficacy results by age subgroup. Regulators should enforce existing geriatric guidance more rigorously and consider incentives for including older populations. So here is the bottom line. Older adults consume the most medications but are least likely to be studied. This is not acceptable. Excluding older patients from clinical trials does not protect them, it exposes them to treatments without evidence. Inclusion requires thoughtful trial design, appropriate support, and ethical safeguards. But it is achievable. The evidence base for medications that millions of older adults take every day will only be trustworthy when those clinical trials reflect the actual population of patients who will use them.